Emma Sullivan clutched the letter from her late grandmother's attorney as she drove through the winding roads of rural Massachusetts. The early autumn leaves scattered across the pavement, creating a tapestry of amber and crimson. After years of living in Boston, this journey to the small town of Millfield felt like stepping back in time. Her grandmother's death last month had been unexpected, leaving Emma with a peculiar inheritance, a Victorian house that had been in the family for generations. "You're the last of the Frost line," the attorney had told her. "Your grandmother was quite insistent that the house and all its contents pass to you." Emma hadn't visited the house since she was a child. Her memories were fragmented: the scent of her grandmother's bread pudding, the creak of the floorboards, and the strange, uneasy feeling she'd had when passing the portrait gallery in the upstairs hallway. As she pulled into the gravel driveway, the house loomed before her, a grand 3-story Victorian with faded blue paint and intricate white trim. Despite years of minimal maintenance, it retained an air of faded elegance. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the wraparound porch, making the windows appear like dark, watchful eyes. Inside, sheets covered the furniture, and dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight that managed to penetrate the heavy curtains. Emma moved through the room slowly, memories washing over her with each step. In the kitchen, she found a note from Mrs. Henderson, the caretaker who had looked after the property. "Welcome home, Miss Sullivan. I've stocked the refrigerator with essentials. The electricity and water are running. Call if you need anything. P.S. Your grandmother left something for you in the study." The study was a small room lined with bookshelves, dominated by a heavy oak desk. On top sat a leather-bound journal and a small brass key. Emma picked up the journal, her grandmother's elegant handwriting filling its pages. The first entry was dated 1985, the year Emma was born. "Eleanor was born today. Margaret has named her after our mother. I pray she never discovers what lies in our family's past. I've hidden the portraits in the attic. May they remain there undisturbed." Emma frowned, flipping through more pages. Her grandmother's entries became increasingly paranoid over the years, filled with references to watchful eyes and the child who should not be. As the sun set, Emma felt an inexplicable chill. She decided to spend the night and begin sorting through her grandmother's belongings in the morning. As she climbed the stairs to the master bedroom, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Later that night, a storm rolled in. Rain lashed against the windows as Emma tossed and turned in the unfamiliar bed. A loud crash from above startled her awake. The attic. Something had fallen. With a flashlight in hand, Emma made her way to the narrow staircase that led to the attic. The brass key from her grandmother's desk fit perfectly in the lock. The door swung open with a groan of protest, revealing a space cluttered with trunks, furniture, and several large objects covered with sheets. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room for a brief moment. Emma's heart skipped a beat. In that instant, she could have sworn she saw a small figure standing in the corner. When the darkness returned, it was gone. Morning brought clarity and sunshine that dispersed the shadows of the previous night. Emma convinced herself that exhaustion and grief had played tricks on her mind. Determined to start cataloging her inheritance, she returned to the attic with a clipboard and camera. The attic was less intimidating in daylight. Dust-covered furniture and trunks filled the space, but Emma's attention was drawn to the wall where several large sheet-covered frames leaned. She approached them cautiously, remembering her grandmother's journal, the portraits hidden in the attic. With a gentle tug, she pulled the sheet from the first frame. A stern-faced man with mutton-chop whiskers stared back at her. The brass plaque at the bottom read, "Jeremiah Frost, 1845. Her ancestor, the founder of the Frost family in Millfield. One by one, Emma unveiled the portraits, generations of Frosts captured in oil and canvas. The clothing styles evolved from Victorian to Edwardian, then to the more modern fashions of the early 20th century. Each portrait was meticulously labeled with names and dates. The final and largest portrait was a family grouping. The Frost family, 1870, read the plaque. Emma studied the formal arrangement, Jeremiah and his wife Elizabeth seated, surrounded by their 5 children. 4 boys of varying ages stood stiffly in their Sunday best, but it was the small girl seated on Elizabeth's lap that caught Emma's attention. Unlike the solemn expressions of her family members, the girl wore a faint smile. Her eyes seemed to follow Emma as she moved, an illusion created by the skilled artist. Something about the child's gaze made Emma's skin prickle with goosebumps. She took photos of each portrait, then covered them again, unable to shake her unease. Back in the study, Emma searched through her grandmother's files, looking for information about the family history. In a drawer locked with a key similar to the attic key, she found a folder labeled Frost Family Records. Inside were birth certificates, death certificates, and newspaper clippings dating back to the 1800s. Emma spread them on the desk, organizing them chronologically. As she worked through the documents, she noticed something odd. A death certificate for Catherine Frost. Aged 4 years, dated March 15, 1870. The cause of death was listed as fever. Emma frowned, returning to her photos of the family portrait. The date on the portrait was November 1870, 8 months after Catherine's death. Yet there she was, sitting on her mother's lap, smiling that unsettling smile. Perhaps the date was wrong, or the portrait had been started before the child's death and completed afterward, the artist working from memory. Emma made a note to research 19th century portrait practices. That afternoon, Emma drove into town to visit the Millfield Historical Society. The building was small but well-maintained, staffed by an elderly woman who introduced herself as Martha Wilson. "Sullivan, you said? Oh, you must be Evelyn Frost's granddaughter. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you. I'm trying to learn more about my family's history, specifically about a portrait from 1870. Martha's expression changed subtly. "The family portrait with Jeremiah and Elizabeth. You found it then?" "Yes, I noticed something strange. There's a girl in the portrait, but I found a death certificate suggesting she died before the portrait was painted." Martha hesitated. "That would be Catherine. The story. Well, it's become something of a local legend, not something the Frost family like to discuss." "What kind of legend?" "They say the artist refused to finish the portrait after painting the family. Claimed the girl kept appearing in his sketches even though he'd been told there were only 4 children to paint. When Jeremiah insisted the girl be included, the artist quit town altogether." Emma felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. But why would Jeremiah want a dead child in the portrait? Martha shook her head. "Grief affects people in strange ways. The parish records confirm Catherine died that spring. Typhoid fever took many children that year." Emma left with photocopies of newspaper articles from the period and more questions than answers. As she drove back to the house, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the road. For a moment she thought she saw a small figure standing at the edge of the woods, but it vanished when she blinked. That evening, Emma continued reading her grandmother's journal, searching for mentions of Catherine or the portrait. The entries from the 1990s became increasingly disturbed, referencing nightmares and the child's footsteps in the hallway. "I heard her again last night," read an entry from 1997. "The sound of a child's laughter, then crying. Eleanor feels it too, though she's too young to understand. I've contacted Professor Simmons at the university. He suggests the portrait be destroyed, but I cannot bring myself to erase our history, dark as it may be." Emma looked up from the journal, listening to the sounds of the old house settling. A branch scraped against the window, making her jump. She closed the journal and prepared for bed, double-checking that all the doors were locked. Sleep came fitfully. In her dreams, Emma wandered the halls of the house, following the sound of a child humming a lullaby. The melody was familiar, but just beyond recognition. She turned a corner and saw a small figure in a white nightgown disappearing around the next bend. "Wait!" she called, but her voice made no sound. Emma jerked awake, her heart pounding. The bedroom was cold, much colder than when she'd fallen asleep. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:17 a.m. As she reached for the blanket to pull it higher, she froze. There, at the foot of her bed, was a small indentation, as if someone had been sitting there watching her sleep. Emma switched on the lamp, illuminating the empty room. The indentation remained for a moment, then slowly disappeared, as if whatever had made it had just stood up. A faint scent of lavender lingered in the air, the same scent from her grandmother's sachets. Morning couldn't come fast enough. Emma spent the remaining hours before dawn researching on her laptop. She found academic articles about Victorian postmortem photography, where families posed with their deceased loved ones as a form of remembrance. But Catherine's portrait was different. She wasn't posed like a corpse, but painted as if alive, smiling even. As the sun rose, Emma returned to the attic with renewed determination. She uncovered the family portrait again, studying Catherine's face in the morning light. The girl's eyes seemed to hold a secret, and her smile now appeared knowing rather than innocent. Emma noticed something she'd missed before. Catherine was holding something in her small hand, a pendant or locket partially obscured by her fingers. Emma took more photos, zooming in as much as her phone camera allowed. The pendant appeared to be oval-shaped with some kind of inscription. Back in the study, Emma searched through the family records again. Among Elizabeth Frost's possessions listed in her will was one silver locket, containing hair of my beloved daughter Catherine, to be buried with me. Emma found herself driving to the Millfield Cemetery an hour later. The Frost family plot was in the oldest section, marked by a large marble angel. She located Elizabeth's grave, the headstone weather-worn but still legible. Elizabeth Ann Frost, 1825 to 1891, beloved wife and mother. Next to it was a much smaller stone, Catherine Rose Frost, 1866 to 1870, Our angel sleeps. As Emma stood contemplating the graves, she noticed a groundskeeper working nearby. The elderly man nodded in greeting. "You're the Sullivan girl, aren't you? Evelyn's granddaughter." "Yes. How did you know?" "Small town." He shrugged. "Plus, you look like a Frost. Same eyes." Emma hadn't thought about family resemblance before. "I'm researching my family history." "Do you know anything about Catherine Frost?" The man's expression darkened. "Only stories passed down. They say Elizabeth never accepted the child's death. Kept her room exactly as it was. Claimed she could hear her playing. Jeremiah eventually had her committed to the asylum in Springfield for a time. And the portrait? The one with Catherine in it? Even though she'd died? That's the strangest part of the tale. They say Jeremiah paid the artist extra to include her. But when the portrait was delivered, Elizabeth became hysterical, claiming the child in the painting wasn't Catherine at all. Emma returned to the house with her mind racing. If the child in the portrait wasn't Catherine, who was she? And why would Elizabeth claim her own daughter was someone or something else? The afternoon stretched into evening as Emma continued her research. An old county map showed that the land where the Frost house stood had once been part of a larger property that included an orphanage run by the local church. The orphanage had burned down in 1865, with several children perishing in the fire. Emma wondered if there could be a connection. Perhaps Jeremiah and Elizabeth had adopted a child from the orphanage before the fire, but that wouldn't explain Catherine's death certificate or grave. As darkness fell, Emma found herself drawn back to the attic. The portrait seemed to call to her, a mystery begging to be solved. She uncovered it again, setting up a small desk lamp to better examine the details. In the focused light, Emma noticed something she'd missed before, a small inscription in the bottom corner of the canvas, partially hidden by the frame. Using her phone's flashlight for additional illumination, she made out the words, "May God forgive us." Must be the artist's initials. But what was he asking forgiveness for? The temperature in the attic suddenly dropped. Emma's breath fogged in front of her face. The lamp flickered, then went out, plunging the room into darkness. Her phone's flashlight followed suit a moment later. In the pitch black, Emma heard it, the soft sound of bare feet padding across the wooden floor. Then a child's voice, so close it could have been right beside her ear. "You found me." Emma scrambled backwards, her heart hammering in her chest. Her back hit the wall as the sound of childish giggling filled the attic. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice breaking. "Catherine is sleeping. I'm not Catherine. I'm the other one." A sudden surge of adrenaline propelled Emma toward where she knew the door to be. Her hands found the knob and she wrenched it open, nearly falling down the stairs in her haste to escape. She slammed the attic door behind her, then ran to her bedroom, locking the door and pushing a chair against it for good measure. Sleep was impossible. Emma sat on her bed with all the lights on, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. Around midnight, her phone rang, startling her so badly she nearly dropped it. "Hello? Miss Sullivan? It's Martha Wilson from the Historical Society. I'm sorry to call so late, but I found something about your family that couldn't wait until morning." Emma listened as Martha explained that she'd discovered a journal belonging to the artist Harold Whittaker, who had painted the Frost family portrait. He wrote about a child who appeared in his sketches, a girl he hadn't seen with the family. When he asked Jeremiah about her, he was told to include her in the portrait. But Whittaker became convinced the child he was painting wasn't human. "What do you mean, wasn't human?" His journal entries become increasingly disturbed. He wrote that the child would appear in his studio at night, watching him work, that she told him her name wasn't Catherine but Abigail, and that she had died in the orphanage fire. She wanted to be remembered, to be part of a family. Emma's blood ran cold. The orphanage that burned down in 1865. Yes. Whittaker believed Jeremiah had made some kind of bargain with the child's spirit. In exchange for being included in the family portrait being remembered, she would return Catherine to them. Return her. But Catherine died. Martha's voice dropped to a whisper. According to parish records, yes. But Whittaker's journal tells a different story. He claimed Catherine didn't die of fever. She drowned in the pond behind the house, an accident that Jeremiah blamed himself for. Emma remembered the pond she'd seen from her bedroom window, now mostly overgrown. So this bargain Whittaker believed Jeremiah was trying to bring Catherine back through the portrait. By including Abigail, giving her what she wanted, he thought he could exchange one child's spirit for another. After hanging up, Emma sat in stunned silence. The story was too fantastic to believe, yet it explained the discrepancies she'd found. And after what she'd experienced in the attic, a soft knock on her bedroom door made her freeze. "Emma." A child's voice muffled through the wood. "Emma, will you play with me? I've been so lonely." Emma didn't answer the voice. Instead, she huddled on her bed, clutching her phone and contemplating whether to call the police. What would she tell them? That she was being haunted by a child who died over 150 years ago. The knocking continued intermittently throughout the night, sometimes gentle, sometimes more insistent. Occasionally, the voice would call her name or ask her to come out and play. Emma remained in her room watching as the hours crawled by on her phone's screen. As dawn approached, the house finally fell silent. Exhaustion overtook fear, and Emma drifted into a fitful sleep. She awoke to bright sunlight streaming through the windows. The events of the night seemed like a bad dream in the clarity of day. Still, Emma approached her bedroom door cautiously, removing the chair and turning the lock with trembling fingers. The hallway was empty. No sign remained of her nighttime visitor, if there had ever been one. Emma wondered if stress and her research into family ghost stories had triggered some kind of waking nightmare. After a strong cup of coffee, Emma decided to continue her investigation with a clear head. If there was any truth to Martha's story about Jeremiah's bargain, there might be evidence in his personal papers. She returned to the study, methodically going through the boxes of family documents. In a small leather case tucked inside a larger trunk, Emma found a collection of daguerreotypes and early photographs. Most were formal portraits similar to the paintings upstairs. But one caught her attention, a candid shot of Elizabeth in the garden with a small girl picking flowers in the background. The child's face was blurry, turned away from the camera, but the handwritten note on the back read, "Elizabeth and Catherine, summer 1870. Summer 1870, months after Catherine supposedly died. Another photograph showed Catherine more clearly, sitting on the porch steps with a doll. She was smiling directly at the camera, her eyes bright and alive. The date, August 1870. Emma's hand shook as she examined the photograph. This wasn't a post-mortem photo. The child was clearly alive, animated. But how was that possible if Catherine had died in March? At the bottom of the case, Emma found a sealed envelope addressed to my descendant in Jeremiah's handwriting. The wax seal crumbled as she carefully opened it, revealing several pages of spidery script. To whoever reads these words, I confess my sins in the hope that God and my family will someday forgive me. On March 10, 1870, my beloved daughter Catherine drowned in the pond while under my care. My grief and guilt were beyond bearing, especially knowing how Elizabeth would suffer the loss of her only daughter. In my despair, I sought help from Mrs. Winters, a woman known in certain circles for her connection to the spirit world. She spoke of a child named Abigail who had perished in the orphanage fire, a lonely soul seeking a family. Mrs. Winters suggested in exchange Abigail would help return Catherine to us, and in return, she would be remembered, included in our family history through portrait and photograph. I was a man of science, and had never believed in such superstitions, but grief makes fools of even the wisest men. I agreed to her terms. 3 days after Catherine's funeral, I found her in her bed, alive and seemingly well. Elizabeth's joy knew no bounds. She called it a miracle, believed the doctor had been mistaken about our daughter's death. Only I knew the truth. The child who returned to us looked like Catherine, spoke like Catherine, but there were differences. Her eyes held knowledge no child should possess. She smiled too readily at strange things. And sometimes when she thought no one was watching, she would stand by the pond, staring into its depths as if communicating with someone beneath the surface. Emma paused in her reading, a chill running down her spine despite the warm day. She glanced out the study window toward where the pond would be, partially visible through the overgrown foliage. She continued reading. I commissioned the family portrait as promised, instructing Whitaker to include the child as she appeared to us. But as the painting progressed, Elizabeth began to change. She became withdrawn, watching the child with suspicious eyes. One night I found her in Catherine's room, hysterical. That is not our daughter, she kept saying. Something else wears her face. When the portrait was completed, Elizabeth refused to have it displayed. She claimed the child in the painting was watching her, that its eyes would follow her around the room. I moved the portrait to the attic, but the damage was done. Elizabeth's mind continued to deteriorate until I had no choice but to seek treatment for her in Springfield. The child remained with us, growing as any child would, though she never lost that knowing look, that secret smile. We never spoke of what had happened, of the bargain I had made. To the world, Catherine had recovered from a near-fatal fever, a miracle that strengthened our family's standing in the community. But I knew what I had done. I had invited something unnatural into our home, and the price was Elizabeth's sanity and my eternal soul. Emma set down Jeremiah's letter, her mind reeling. The rational part of her wanted to dismiss it as the ramblings of a grief-stricken father, perhaps suffering from his own mental health issues. But the evidence was mounting. The portrait, the photographs dated after Catherine's death, her own experiences in the house, and now, the pond. Despite her better judgment, Emma found herself drawn to investigate. She changed into sturdier shoes and a light jacket, then made her way through the overgrown backyard toward where the pond lay hidden behind years of neglect. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and damp earth. As Emma pushed through the tangled underbrush, she began to make out the shape of the pond, smaller than she'd imagined, more like a large reflecting pool than a true pond. Its surface was dark and still, covered in places with lily pads and algae. At the pond's edge stood an old stone bench, weathered and covered with lichen. Emma brushed away the debris and sat down, looking out over the water. In Jeremiah's time, this would have been a picturesque spot, carefully maintained as part of the formal gardens. Now, nature had reclaimed it, lending the area a wild, forgotten quality. Something glinted beneath the surface of the water, catching the sunlight. Emma leaned forward, trying to make out what it might be. A reflection, a piece of metal? She picked up a long stick and carefully prodded the spot, stirring up silt and obscuring whatever had caught her attention. As the water settled again, Emma noticed something else, a small handprint in the mud at the pond's edge, as if a child had braced themselves while leaning over to look into the water. The print was fresh, the edges still sharp and defined. Emma stood quickly, scanning the area. "Hello? Is someone there?" Only the rustle of leaves in the breeze answered her. She took a few cautious steps around the pond's perimeter, looking for other signs of a visitor. There were none. No footprints leading to or from the handprint. No broken branches or disturbed foliage to indicate someone had passed through recently. The hair on the back of Emma's neck stood up. She backed away from the pond, unable to shake the feeling that she was being watched. As she turned to head back to the house, a splash behind her made her whirl around. Ripples spread across the pond's surface from a central point, as if something had dropped into the water or emerged from it. Emma didn't wait to see what might follow. She hurried back to the house, not slowing until she was safely inside with the door locked behind her. Her heart hammered in her chest as she tried to make sense of what she'd seen, or thought she'd seen. She needed more information. Pulling out her phone, she called Martha Wilson. "Miss Sullivan? Did you find something in Jeremiah's papers?" Emma explained about the letter, the photographs, and what she'd just experienced at the pond. Martha was silent for a long moment. "There's something I didn't tell you yesterday. Something about your grandmother." "What about her?" "Evelyn came to me about 20 years ago with a similar story. She'd found the portrait in Jeremiah's letter, and she believed the house was haunted by two children, Catherine, the real one who drowned, and the other one, the one who took her place." "Abigail," Emma said softly. "Yes." Evelyn was convinced that the bargain Jeremiah made wasn't just for his lifetime but bound the family for generations. She said the children appeared to her, that they tried to get her to go to the pond. Why the pond? She believed that's where the exchange happened, where Catherine drowned and where the other one could enter our world. According to local legend, the pond was unusually deep for its size, dug over what used to be a natural spring. Some said it had no bottom at all. Emma thought of the handprint in the mud, the splash she'd heard. What did my grandmother do about it? She consulted a medium, then a priest. The priest blessed the house and the pond, and for a while Evelyn said the disturbances stopped. But about 5 years ago she came to me again, frantic. She said they're back, and they want Eleanor. That would be you, I assume. A chill ran through Emma. Why would they want me? I don't know. But shortly after that, Evelyn sealed up the attic and stopped talking about it altogether. When I asked, she would say only that she'd taken care of it and changed the subject. After hanging up, Emma sat in the kitchen, watching the shadows lengthen as afternoon turned to evening. Her grandmother had taken care of it, but what did that mean? And if she had, why was Emma experiencing these things now? She returned to the study, determined to find out what her grandmother had done. There must be more recent journals, notes about the medium and the priest. As she searched through the desk drawers, a small leather-bound book fell from between larger volumes on the shelf above. It opened as it hit the floor, revealing her grandmother's handwriting from just last year. "The binding is weakening. I feel it in my bones, in the air of the house. The children are stirring again. I've done all I can to keep them contained, but my time grows short. I must prepare for Eleanor's return, for the responsibility that will fall to her. God forgive me for what I've done, and for what she will have to do." Emma read through her grandmother's final journal with growing unease. The entries became increasingly erratic over the last year, describing nightmares, whispering voices, and ghostly figures glimpsed in mirrors. Bellin wrote about performing rituals to strengthen the binding, consulting with someone called Madame Renard, and making preparations for Emma's eventual inheritance of the house. The final entry, dated just 2 weeks before her death, was particularly disturbing. "The binding won't hold much longer. I've done what I can to prepare the house for Eleanor. The key to ending this lies with the portrait and the pond. They must both be destroyed. I've left instructions with Joseph. When Eleanor arrives, he will guide her." "Joseph?" Emma didn't know anyone by that name. She searched the journal for previous mentions and found several references to Joseph Gardner, Madame Reynard's assistant and the Gardner boy who knows too much about the other side. Emma reached for her phone to call Martha again. But before she could dial, a text message appeared on her screen from an unknown number. "Miss Sullivan, my name is Joseph Gardner. I worked with your grandmother. We need to talk about the house. Meet me at the Millfield Diner tomorrow at noon. Come alone." Emma stared at the message, unsettled by its timing. How had this Joseph known she was looking for him? And should she trust someone who had been involved in her grandmother's increasingly paranoid activities? She decided to meet him in public during daylight hours, but would remain cautious. In the meantime, she needed to survive another night in the house. Emma methodically checked every door and window, ensuring they were locked. She set up a makeshift alarm system of stacked pots and pans in front of the attic door and her bedroom door. Finally, she placed a chair against her bedroom door and settled in for the night with her laptop, determined to stay awake. She researched binding rituals and found countless references in various spiritual and occult traditions. Many involved containing or trapping spirits through symbols, sacred objects, or specific words of power. Some mentioned physical anchors, objects to which spirits might be bound. The portrait, her grandmother had written that it needed to be destroyed along with the pond. Were these the anchors binding the children's spirits to the house? Despite her intentions to stay awake, exhaustion eventually claimed her. Emma drifted off around 3 a.m., her laptop still open beside her. She dreamed of standing by the pond, watching as two small figures played in the shallow water. One was Catherine. Emma recognized her from the photographs. The other was a girl she hadn't seen before, with darker hair and a serious expression. Abigail. As Emma watched, Catherine leaned too far over the water, reaching for something shiny beneath the surface. She lost her balance and fell in with a splash. Abigail stood motionless, watching as Catherine struggled, then disappeared beneath the dark water. Then Abigail turned, looking directly at Emma with eyes that seemed far too old for her childish face. "It's almost time," she said. "The binding is breaking. She'll be free soon, and so will I." Emma woke with a start as something crashed downstairs. Morning light filtered through her curtains. She had slept longer than intended. The crash came again, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Someone was in the house. Emma grabbed her phone, ready to call 911, when she heard a man's voice call out, "Miss Sullivan, it's Joseph Gardner. I apologize for letting myself in, but it's urgent." Emma cautiously made her way downstairs to find a young man in his late 20s, standing in the foyer amid the broken remains of what had been a vase. He had unruly dark hair and wore a somewhat rumpled tweed jacket that made him look like a disheveled professor. "How did you get in?" Emma demanded. "Your grandmother gave me a key for emergencies. This qualifies." He gestured around them. "Do you see what's happening to the house?" Emma looked where he pointed and gasped. The wallpaper was peeling away in long strips as if being pulled by invisible hands. Water stains spread across the ceiling, growing darker and wider by the second. "The binding is failing completely," Joseph said grimly. "We don't have until noon. We need to act now." "What binding? What's happening to the house?" Emma's voice rose with panic as she watched the stains on the ceiling begin to drip, dark water pattering onto the hardwood floor. Joseph moved quickly, pulling books and supplies from a messenger bag he carried. "Your grandmother bound the spirits to the portrait using a ritual she learned from Madame Renard. It's held for decades, but it was always temporary. The binding weakens with time, and with Evelyn's death, it's collapsing entirely." "Spirits? You mean Catherine and Abigail?" Joseph paused, looking at her with surprise. "You know their names. Good. That will help." He continued arranging items on the coffee table, candles, a small silver bowl, various herbs and powders. "Your grandmother's binding was incomplete. She contained the spirits, but she couldn't release them. That's what we need to do today. Release them how? By destroying what holds them here. The portrait is only half of it. The real anchor is beneath the pond." Emma thought of her dream of Catherine reaching for something shiny beneath the water before she fell in. "What's in the pond?" "A locket. Elizabeth's locket containing Catherine's hair. Jeremiah threw it in after making his bargain, creating a physical link between Catherine's spirit and this world. It's what Abigail used to pull Catherine back, to hold her in between worlds. And the portrait, Abigail's anchor. Jeremiah promised to remember her, to make her part of the family. The portrait fulfilled that promise, giving her a foothold here." Emma watched as Joseph lit the candles, their flames standing unnaturally straight despite the drafts now whistling through the deteriorating house. "So we destroy both and they're released?" "It's not quite that simple. The spirits will resist. They've been bound for over a century, developing a symbiotic relationship. Catherine wants rest but fears what lies beyond. Abigail fears being forgotten again, returning to the loneliness she endured before. From upstairs came the sound of shattering glass, followed by childish laughter. Joseph looked up, his expression grim. They know what we're planning. We need to hurry. He handed Emma a small vial of clear liquid. Holy water, blessed by the same priest who helped your grandmother. Sprinkle it around the portrait before we destroy it. I'll prepare what we need for the pond. How do we destroy the portrait? Burn it? Joseph shook his head. Fire would only release the spirit uncontrolled. We need to unmake it, reverse the process of its creation. I've brought the tools we need. As Emma turned to head upstairs, Joseph caught her arm. Be careful. Abigail will try to stop you. She can't hurt you physically, but she can manipulate objects, create illusions. Whatever you see or hear, remember it's not real. Emma nodded, trying to project more confidence than she felt. With the vial clutched tightly in her hand, she made her way up to the attic. The door stood open, the pots and pans she'd stacked as an alarm scattered across the floor. Inside, the attic was transformed. The dust and cobwebs were gone, replaced by the appearance of a child's playroom. Toys from various eras lay scattered about, Victorian dolls alongside modern stuffed animals. In the center stood the portrait, uncovered and somehow larger than Emma remembered. And sitting before it, her back to Emma, was a small figure in a white dress. "Hello, Emma," said the child without turning around. "Have you come to play with us?" Emma's mouth went dry. She clutched the vial of holy water tighter, remembering Joseph's warning. "Abigail," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I know who you are." The child turned slowly, revealing a face that matched the smiling girl in the portrait. Her dark eyes were too knowing for her young face, her smile too calculating. "Then you know what I want," Abigail said, her voice carrying an unnatural echo. "To be remembered, to be part of a family, is that so much to ask?" "You've been holding Catherine here against her will," Emma replied, taking a cautious step forward. "For over a century." Abigail's smile faded. "She would have moved on without me, left me alone again. I couldn't bear it." She stood, smoothing down her dress, a perfect replica of the one she wore in the portrait. "We made a bargain, just as Jeremiah did. I helped her return to her family, and in exchange, she stays with me. That's not how bargains work. You tricked her, just like you tricked Jeremiah." The temperature in the attic plummeted. Emma's breath clouded in front of her face as Abigail's expression darkened. "I gave them what they wanted. Jeremiah wanted his daughter back, and I returned her. Catherine was lonely beneath the water, and I gave her companionship." Abigail's voice took on a pleading tone. "And now I'm offering you the same. Stay with us, Emma. Be part of our family forever." From the shadows behind the portrait stepped another child, Catherine, dressed in the same clothing Emma had seen in the photographs from 1870. Unlike Abigail, her form was less substantial, her edges blurring into the darkness. "She lies," Catherine whispered, her voice like rustling leaves. "I never wanted to return. I was at peace until she pulled me back. Please, help me." Abigail whirled on Catherine, her face contorting with rage. "Liar! You were crying out for your mother, for your father. I heard you." While they argued, Emma inched closer to the portrait, uncorking the vial. She needed to get close enough to sprinkle the holy water around its frame. "Your grandmother tried to separate us," Abigail said suddenly, turning back to Emma. "She thought she could free Catherine and leave me behind. But we're bound together now, two sides of the same coin. Free one, free both, or trap us here forever." "I'm not trying to trap you," Emma said carefully. "I want to help you both move on, find peace." "Peace?" Abigail laughed, a high, cold sound that made Emma's skin crawl. "There's no peace for children like us. Only remembrance or oblivion." Objects around the attic began to shake, toys rising into the air, old furniture rattling against the floor. A gust of wind whipped through the room, though all the windows were closed. "I won't let you destroy the portrait," Abigail declared. "It's mine. My promise from Jeremiah, my place in the family." Emma lunged forward, tipping the vial and flinging the holy water in an arc that splashed across the portrait's frame and canvas. The water sizzled where it landed, like droplets on a hot pan. Abigail screamed, a sound of pure fury that made the windows rattle in their frames. The floating objects hurled themselves at Emma, who ducked and covered her head as toys, books, and debris rained down around her. "Joseph," Emma shouted. "I need help." Footsteps pounded up the stairs, and Joseph burst into the attic carrying a cloth-wrapped bundle. His eyes widened at the scene before him, the floating objects. The spectral children, the portrait now smoking where the holy water had touched it. The bindings breaking on its own, he called to Emma over the howling wind that filled the room. The holy water weakened it. "We need to get to the pond now before it shatters completely." Emma scrambled toward him, dodging a flying book that nearly took her head off. Joseph unwrapped his bundle, revealing a set of silver tools, small knives, brushes, and vials similar to what an art restorer might use. "These will unmake the portrait," he explained quickly. but we need to retrieve the locket first. If the binding breaks before we're ready, both spirits will be released without guidance. They could linger here indefinitely or attach themselves to new anchors. How do we get past them? Emma nodded toward Abigail, who stood before the portrait like a guardian, Catherine's more translucent form beside her. Joseph pulled a small pouch from his pocket, salt and iron filings. Form a circle around them while I distract them. He stepped forward, addressing the spirits directly. Abigail, Catherine, I can help you both find what you truly seek. Abigail's eyes narrowed suspiciously. You can't trick me, Joseph Gardner. Your kind has tried before. While Joseph kept them engaged, Emma circled behind, sprinkling the mixture of salt and iron in a wide arc. As the circle closed, both children seemed to waver, their forms becoming less distinct. Now, Emma, run for the pond. Emma bolted for the door, Joseph close behind. They raced down the stairs and through the deteriorating house. Plaster rained down from the ceiling and the floorboards groaned beneath their feet. Outside, the sky had darkened unnaturally, heavy clouds gathering directly over the property. The binding is collapsing, Joseph panted as they ran toward the pond. The house itself was part of it. Evelyn used it as a container. When it goes completely, there's no telling what will happen. They reached the pond, which no longer looked like the peaceful, overgrown pool Emma had visited the day before. The water churned and bubbled, its surface black as ink. The stone bench had cracked down the middle, and the surrounding vegetation appeared withered and dead. The locket is down there, Joseph said, pointing to the center of the pond. We need to retrieve it before. A scream of rage tore through the air. Looking back, Emma saw Abigail standing in the doorway of the house, her form now towering and distorted, stretching up to the roofline. Behind her, Catherine's ghost drifted like a pale shadow. They've broken through the circle, Joseph said grimly. We don't have much time. The wind whipped around them, bending trees and sending leaves spiraling into the air. The pond's surface roiled and churned as if something beneath was trying to break free. I'll get the locket, Emma shouted over the howling gale. You prepare whatever we need to unmake the portrait. Before Joseph could protest, Emma kicked off her shoes and waded into the pond. The water was ice cold, instantly numbing her legs. Despite its murky appearance, once she was in the water, Emma found she could see through it with unnatural clarity, all the way to the bottom, which seemed much deeper than should have been possible for a pond of this size. There, nestled in the silt, gleamed a silver oval, Elizabeth's locket, untarnished despite lying underwater for over a century. Emma took a deep breath and dove down, pushing against the water that seemed to resist her, becoming thicker and more viscous the deeper she went. Her lungs began to burn as she stretched her arm toward the locket. Her fingers brushed against its cold metal surface, then closed around it. Immediately, a shock ran up her arm, images flooding her mind, Catherine playing by the pond, reaching for the same locket, falling forward, the weight around her neck pulling her down into the dark water. Emma kicked hard, fighting her way back to the surface. As her head broke through, she gasped for air, clutching the locket tightly. Joseph stood at the pond's edge, the tools from his bundle arranged carefully on a flat stone. He had sketched symbols around them with chalk, symbols that glowed with a faint blue light. Behind him, the spectral form of Abigail advanced across the lawn, the house crumbling in her wake. I have it, Emma called, wading toward shore. The moment she stepped onto dry land, the locket burned hot in her palm. She nearly dropped it, but managed to place it among Joseph's tools. Now what? We need to unmake both anchors simultaneously, Joseph explained quickly, his eyes on the approaching spirit. The portrait and the locket. I prepared the tools for the portrait, but the locket needs to be returned to its original state, which was open, empty, and in Elizabeth's possession. Emma fumbled with the locket's clasp, her fingers numb from the cold water. It resisted, then suddenly snapped open. Inside was a small coil of blonde hair, Catherine's hair preserved all these years. Remove the hair, Joseph instructed, and read this. He handed her a slip of paper with words written in a language Emma didn't recognize. As Abigail drew nearer, Emma carefully removed the hair from the locket. The moment she did, a wail rose from the approaching spirit, a cry of loss and fury that shook the ground beneath their feet. Now, Emma, read the words. Emma began to recite the unfamiliar syllables, her voice growing stronger with each word. Joseph picked up his tools and began to work on an invisible canvas before him, mimicking the motions of unpainting the portrait that hung in the attic. The air around them shimmered and warped. Abigail's spectral form flickered like a faulty projection. Behind her, Catherine's ghost grew more distinct, separating from Abigail's influence. It's working, Joseph said, his hands moving faster. Keep reading. Emma continued the incantation, holding the empty locket out before her like a shield. The wind died down suddenly, creating an eerie pocket of stillness around them. In that moment of quiet, Catherine's ghost drifted forward, no longer a shadow of Abigail, but her own distinct entity. She looked at Emma with eyes full of gratitude and sorrow. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice clearer than before. "I've been trapped so long, don't listen to her," Abigail shrieked, her form distorting further. "She'd leave me alone again." "You won't be alone," Emma said, pausing in her reading. "You'll both be free to move on, to find peace. I don't want peace. I want to be remembered." "And you will be," Emma promised. "I'll remember you both. I'll keep your stories alive, tell people what happened here. But I'll tell the truth, not the lie that's been preserved in that portrait." Abigail hesitated, her rage faltering. "You would do that? Remember me truly?" "Yes, not as a bargain or a binding, but as a promise. One person to another." Catherine drifted closer to Abigail, reaching out a transparent hand. "Come with me, Abigail. It's not lonely where I've been. There are others waiting. We can go together." For a moment, Abigail's form stabilized, taking on the appearance of the small, serious girl she must have been in life, not the unnatural, smiling child from the portrait. "You won't forget us?" she asked Emma, her voice suddenly that of a frightened child rather than a supernatural entity. "I won't," Emma said firmly. "I promise." Joseph completed his unpainting, his hands making one final sweeping gesture. At the same moment, Emma spoke the last words of the incantation and closed the empty locket. Light burst from both children, blinding in its intensity. Emma shielded her eyes, feeling the locket grow warm in her hand, not burning hot as before, but with a gentle, living heat. When the light faded and she could see again, both Abigail and Catherine were gone. The pond was still once more, its surface reflecting the sky, which had cleared to a brilliant blue. The house, though damaged, had stopped its accelerated decay. Joseph sank to his knees, exhausted. "It's done. They've moved on." Emma looked down at the locket in her hand. Inside, where Catherine's hair had been, was now a small, perfect wildflower, the kind that grew around the pond in springtime. "Not forgotten," she murmured. "Just free." In the weeks that followed, Emma began the process of repairing the house. She hired contractors to fix the structural damage, carefully explaining away the worst of it as long-term neglect rather than a supernatural event. The portrait was gone from the attic, not burned or destroyed, but simply no longer there, as if it had never existed. The photographs remained, however, documenting the strange, sad history of the Frost family. Emma kept her promise. She worked with Martha Wilson to create an exhibit at the Millfield Historical Society about the orphanage fire and the children who had perished there, including Abigail. Another display told the true story of Catherine Frost's drowning and her family's grief. The pond was dredged and restored to its original beauty, with a small memorial stone placed on its bank. Emma kept Elizabeth's locket, now empty save for the wildflower that somehow never withered. Sometimes on quiet evenings, Emma would sit by the pond and speak softly to the girls, telling them about her day, about the progress on the house, about the visitors who came to see the exhibition and learn their stories, not as a ritual or an obligation, but as a friend keeping a promise. And sometimes, though she never mentioned this to Joseph or Martha or anyone else, she could have sworn she heard childish laughter in response. Not eerie or threatening, but joyful and free, carried on the breeze that stirred the surface of the pond into gentle, shimmering ripples.